There it goes.
All right. Okay, hi everybody. My name is Greg Larkin. We have a wonderful, I don't need to shout this loud actually. I can speak like you're right here. Sorry. My name is Greg Larkin. We have a wonderful panel about how startups and large corporations can collaborate. I say it's a panel. Really what I want it to be is a conversation, and what I even more want it to be is a no bullshit conversation. It's one of the hardest things any large organization can do is make the marriage between startups and corporations not end in divorce. And on one hand, we're at a moment in time where if you're not innovative, you won't be here for very long. And on another time, you have an enormous amount of entrenched habits in a large corporation that make innovation and especially partnerships with startups exceedingly difficult, to the point that 83% of them end in failure. We're lucky that on this panel we have people that have succeeded in being in the right end of that 80-20 split. We're joined by two entrepreneurs. We have Ben down there, who is the director for the Center of the Future of Work at Cognizant. Saskia joins us from Bayer. And we also have a couple, I'm going to say, which is a rare example of a startup corporate acquisition that has ended in harmonious, fruitful, value-added harmony. So that's a wonderful premise for this conversation. But I think more importantly than that, we have the perspective of survivors. I think when I say it's going to be a conversation between us and between you, the worst thing that I've ever had to endure in your side of this is having to listen to someone talk about how they're a superhero as it pertains to innovation. I'd rather hear about how this is hard, how you overcome those obstacles, and I hope that you can participate in that conversation with us. So I'm going to ask a really hard question. My questions are deliberately pointed. I am not going to aim that at specific people. I'm going to put them out there and invite people to grab the ones they like. So the first question I have is, when was the last time you got home from work at night and you're like, I need to quit my job?
Well, I can. You want to start?
No,
I can. Do you hear me? So yeah, I can start. Speaking of as a big corporation, there's just one word: approval process, which is. So we have a lot of great things, but in pharmaceuticals where I'm from, there's a lot of regulation. So we had a meeting actually on discussing the 14-step approval process for app as a medical device. So as you can imagine, all the people in the room were sitting there and saying, oh no, but we definitely need each and every one of these 14 steps. So I felt like I'm ready to shoot myself, but luckily we were able to kind of slim it down and really get everyone on the same page. But let's say at that night, I was like, what are we doing here? It's so complex, which shouldn't be. So we made progress, but that was definitely not one of the highlights I want to say of the year. So.
Sure. So, I think on my end, it's probably an annual thing. And that's every that time of year when Cisco does our 5 to 10% haircut, where we just drop a bunch of people in our workforce. And it's disheartening. But, the way we approach it is that Cisco, started networking space, and we're trying to reinvent ourselves constantly. That means we need new skills. To be innovative, you can't just, take the same people you have necessarily and retrain them. Obviously you got to retrain what you have, but in order to do that quicker, you need to chop off some new, chop off some of the old, bring in some new. So to see that though every year, 5%'s got to go, 5%'s got to go. When I first came to Cisco, I was like, ooh, it's been tough. We've had this 2 years in a row, and then it was 3 years in a row, 4 years in a row, and then after, like almost a decade, it's like, I guess this is just the way that the business is. But it's done for innovation. It's not necessarily for any other financial aspect.
for me, it probably is this feeling on the days when I go home from work and I haven't been able to do it better, right? Like, I think when you get to the size where we are now, close to 2,000 people within the business unit, sometimes it takes a lot longer to be able to change something as opposed to kind of how it used to be. I joined Meraki when it was just around 200 people. And when we wanted to change something, we would stand by the coffee machine, we would talk about it, and then by Tuesday it would be different. Like, we could do that on Friday, and Tuesday, like, we had made a change and communicated that change, and everybody knew what was going to happen next. So I do think that sometimes, as a person that really likes to drive to impact, when I realize that the changes will take months and months as opposed to days, it does make me want to go home and pull out this very crazy hair and call it a day. But I think that's probably a feeling that most of us have, sort of working within a larger organization.
How about you, Ben?
When was the last time I wanted to be in the crying room? I hadn't heard that phrase before. I like that. It was quite cool. I don't want to sound smug, but it's quite a few years ago now. I think the last time I wanted to go into the crying room. It was when...
Sound lucky, not smug.
Well, I am, I think, very lucky. My little punchline is the future of work is not work. And I don't work very much. So, because I love what I do. So, but the last time, a little anecdote, little story, I used to work for a company called Gartner. I don't know whether some of the tech people know Gartner. I was an analyst with Gartner for many years, and I interviewed the CEO of Salesforce, Mark Benioff, live on stage at the symposium, the Gartner Symposium, which is a big show every year. So a room like this, but with 9,995 more people in it. And Mark Benioff wasn't very nice to me on the stage. He tore me apart. So I ran off after that, and I wanted to cry. So it was, but I survived. You always learn. You learn more from being beaten up than you learn more from the bad days than you do from the good days.
Are you asking me to get you to? No, I'm kidding. Is
That's your challenge.
So when you do have those moments, what's the recovery time and what's the recovery process?
It's a great question. I think that's one of the key attributes of the future of work is resilience. I mean, anybody who's been around in any process, doing anything for any length of time, that old punchline, it's no, 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 yes. You've got to go through a lot of no's to get to the yes. And the resilience, that ability to get up from the no, I think is a crucial differentiator for those people who succeed and those people who fail.
Yeah.
Another famous Englishman, Winston Churchill, once said that success is going from one failure to another without any loss of enthusiasm. And I think that's very true.
Yeah.
So maybe what I would add, the way I go through these sometimes endless, what I just mentioned, approval structures and so on, I actually spend a lot of time with patients or the people we're doing these things for. And when you are in a clinic or when you're out there and you see really patients there, you see the parents and you see how our treatments actually help them, that actually energizes me because it tells me, yes, you're going through all that stuff and oh my God, the internet and so on. However, in the end, this will change the life of someone and help them. So that's actually what helps me a lot, and specifically on these days which are not so easy. So that makes the recovery time, I want to say, very easy. So that next day I'm like, okay, but still we need to get the app out there to help them. We need to get the treatment out there. So I want to say, why are you doing it? Is kind of instead of focusing on the what and how.
Yeah.
But why? That's actually helping me a lot.
I guess the question I have for Cisco and Cisco Meraki is, what are the aspects of startup life that you had to leave behind that you think back on and wish you could bring with you? That's more toward Denise, I suppose.
Sure, yeah, no, for sure.
We used to have beer in the fridge. No, we do not have beer in the fridge anymore.
Now you have non-alcoholic beer in the fridge.
We have all the flavors of any version of sparkling water you could possibly imagine. But all kidding aside, I sometimes it's hard for me to dissect how much of it is leaving behind because of joining a larger organization or how much of it is just leaving behind because of scale, right? Again, when I joined, we were much smaller. We sort of were sitting in a moment where we had really intimate relationships with each other, right? Like you could know 100 people really well, and there were only 200 of us, so chances are you knew 50% of the people really well, right? And I think that's sort of what we've had to learn to grow into is a different way of creating community and a different way of creating team. Far more deliberate, far more architected, and it's something that you don't really think about when you are in that startup space sometimes, because it's just everyone's showing up with this level of commitment. Everyone shows up with this like, give me a problem, I'm ready to solve it. Everyone shows up like doing hundreds of things in order to move us in a shared direction. And I think as you get bigger and your organization gets a bit more complex, what happens is that swim lines emerge and people have to really learn how to work and collaborate with each other differently. So we had to learn a new way of working together.
Yeah.
That included our colleagues at Cisco, included their partners and our partners, included our team internally, and we had to leave behind some of the informal ways that we communicated in order to be able to have a team that was focused on the same set of priorities.
Yeah.
That was a huge difference, and I think sometimes when we think about the failures within an organization that gets married to another organization, I think that's one of the things that people don't step over. They don't know that they have to actually change the way that they communicate.
Chris, what was the conversation that post-acquisition you think to yourself, man, that's a conversation we really should have had before we got married?
Yeah, no, so that's a good one. So Cisco, obviously Meraki is not our only acquisition, so you're okay if I kind of vamp on over just other acquisitions.
Yeah.
So, a while back, Cisco got the great idea, hey, let's get into the consumer space. We're already, a titan of the enterprise space. So one by one, we started to say, Scientific Atlanta, Cisco wants to be in your living room. Not physically break into your house, but we want to be in the network, in your living room, got the cable. So we acquired Scientific Atlanta. Then we said, you know what? We also want to get into consumer video. So I don't know if anybody remembers the flip video cameras that were totally pervasive before everyone started getting it on their phone. Cisco swallowed up flip video. And then the third piece of that was Linksys. And I'm sure everybody at some point had one of the blue and black Linksys routers back in the day. So, here we had Linksys, we had Scientific Atlanta, we had Flip, all these various components of the consumer space that we said, this is great, all these great acquisitions. But the reality is, on paper it looked great, but there was no heart to it all. And, I think had we taken a step back beforehand and said, this creature that we're creating, we need the heart, we need the brain, not just, some great looking appendages here. And I think that was a big miss. I think had we been able to go back and do it a little bit differently, we might have been a little bit smarter, but, it makes you realize that it's not just about going out and capturing whatever the greatest asset is at the time, because that consumer business is something we completely vacated.
What is the characteristic that, after having been through startup, corporate collaboration, partnership for as long as all of you have, what is the single hidden characteristic that is like, someone who does X is likely to be a very good partner? What does that tell?
Shall I? One observation from a big company, and maybe some of you are in kind of smaller companies and on the other side of the kind of deal table, And I don't say this to just, put one side of the argument. It obviously takes, there's a lot of, takes two to tango. There's a lot of kind of fault on both sides. But one of my observations is that smaller companies get bought. They get very excited by that because there's a liquidity event or there's the potential of a liquidity event. And nowadays, particularly with capital markets, the whole equation of how you get that exit is very different to what it was 10 years ago. Little companies get very excited, and I'll probably get booed here and booted out of the room, but get a little arrogant. It's funny because if you think about the dynamic, we're buying you, so we must like you. And there's a little bit arrogant.
Or you're buying you because we think we can fix you.
Yes, that's true, but I'm talking the psychology of the smaller party. There's a little arrogance that comes into it. And I think the big mistake that smaller companies make coming into a big company is that they kind of expect the big company to change. I remember when, this was back in prehistory, AT&T brought an early cloud vendor, and the cloud vendor said, we don't know whether we're the seed or the virus in AT&T. So my advice for the smaller company in the sort of strange psychology of power, and again I see this mistake and I've seen this work, and I think it's the number one kind of recipe for success in this relationship, is that the smaller player needs to make friends with the sales team in the bigger player. Find the salespeople who are actually on the interface with the client. Make them your best friends. Take them to dinner, take them to lunch, get drunk with them in, the WeWork, the WeWork tap. Make that salesperson your best friend, because ultimately that's your channel. You're in an internal channel environment, and if you don't understand how channels work in big companies, then you are simply a virus and you'll never be the seed, and your exit strategy, your liquidity event will be a fraction of what it could be if you're really successful.
Does anyone else want to jump in on that?
The only thing that I would add, just having some sort of open culture. Me speaking more from the corporate end, because if you have that closed culture and expect that any acquisition you make that you're going to have to conform all of those people, they'll be gone. I mean, there's no way that'll happen. And I think if you look at Cisco's history, for example, really laid back California culture, early in the Valley. That's part of the reason why we've been so successful over the last 30 years acquiring so many companies. I mean, no one, not even Google, Apple, IBM, has acquired more market valuation of companies in that time span than Cisco. And it's because, we're open to, doesn't matter who you are, what you are. And I think that mentality helps.
I do think that there's hubris on both ends.
Yes.
And
Thank you, Denise.
Yeah.
I was hoping you'd say that.
As someone who came into Cisco, I remember even just sort of the engagement that we had with the acquisition team. And I would sit in the room and I would think, well, if you could have built this, you would have. So we're kind of sitting here because you didn't. But at the same time, I think on the flip side of it, I think there's a path there to go from the size we were to the size we are now and the size that we hope to be 3 or 4 years from now. And that path actually does require a lot of partnership with our parent company and the sales team at Cisco. It does require a lot of partnership with our customers who already have a relationship with Cisco across multiple business units. And I think that we, to your point, we missed that at the beginning. Like, we sat in it and we said, hey, we have this thing. We are cloud native in a world that is command line driven, and we have an opportunity to do something different here in this company. And where we've had some challenges has been in this place where we didn't sort of recognize what we could learn and how we could grow from the other things. So when you ask what needs to exist, I think there needs to be some humility in the moment. and there needs to be some sort of, to your point, resilience and flexibility in the process, both at the beginning and as you continue to grow your businesses together.
So I want to pick up on that, Denise, for a second. I've been through 7 acquisitions.
That seems like 6 too many.
Right. So I was acquired twice, and I was the acquirer 3 times, and I was an advisor the 2 other times. Every startup CEO who gets acquired views it as a validation that everything they've done was right, that they've finally made it, they should be running things. It's only a matter of time before the company that bought them realizes that they're the better company. And it's this event that you're, as a startup founder, it's drilled into you. That is the definition of success. And then you fast forward a few years, and every one of those founders wishes either that it didn't happen or that they could go back and do it completely differently. How do you overcome that? Because and the flip, there's a corporate corollary to that, which is that the teams within large corporations that acquire startups very often are made up of investment bankers, which have nothing to do with the operation of the actual company. The value of an investment banker is figuring out how you're going to acquire an asset and run it better than it could have been run before you acquired it. So there's this inherent built-in system inside of a large corporate acquirer which treats any acquisition like a distressed asset, whether it's true or not. So you have this sort of dual hubris going into it. The premise of the acquisition from both sides is sort of, it sets it up for an inherent clash of titans, or it's certainly a clash of narcissists is maybe a better way to say that. And how do you dispel those myths? What's the date you can go on before you get married that lets you know whether you can actually have the humility that you just identified? I stumped everybody. Seems like we're all stuck.
Well, I'll give some thoughts. Any investment bankers in the room?
Ex-investment banker, but
Then we can trash the vampire squids then. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, a deal's a deal to them. They want deals. That's what they're set up to do, make deals. Whether they work, whether they don't work, well, there's probably a kicker in the contract downstream if it works, but that's gravy, and we can live without that gravy because we did so well in the meat and the front end.
right.
So no, this is a great learning curve for companies as they grow. Small companies to medium-sized companies to big companies. You guys, Cisco, obviously have got one of the best track records, but have had lots of bumps along the way as well. Oracle have bought up a huge number of companies. Similarly, a lot of bumps along the way. My company, Cognizant's a big company. We've done deals. Some of them work, some of them don't work. There's a learning process for everybody in it. I think, as we're all agreeing, there's a lot of hubris on both sides. Again, that's why I come back to simple metrics, simple tactical things, understand your channel, understand what the motivation of your account people are they coin operated, are they complex deals? Doing the deal isn't the end, it's the beginning of another whole stage. And if you don't think about it in that way, if you're already beginning to think about the 911 you're going to buy, or the place in Maui you're going to buy, that blows people's heads up, and that's how big deals go wrong typically.
Yeah, maybe to add what you said around the learning curve, I think that's actually what happened a lot during the last years. So at the beginning, it was always big corporation, startup, you buy them, you're trying to kind of integrate them, and that's almost the death of innovation and what they're doing there. And you very rapidly lose the best people, like you just said. So I think it starts with, first of all, mutual respect to understand, as you said earlier, the startup can do something you obviously can't do as a bigger company. On the other hand, as a bigger company, you can scale. I mean, you have like 52 countries, you have the offices, you have, as you said, the sales force, like all the channels. So now the big question is, how do we, as I said, go enter a happy marriage here, so to say? And what we learned is, first of all, we need to be very open to understand there is two different cultures. And we need to understand that they are also, when it comes in terms of speed, completely different thing. So how can we do actually this mixture of preserving what they have, yet taking this what they have as an asset and then scale it, so to say. And what we found is a mix of sometimes actually having them inside, like really as part of our company in a line organization, depending on what it is. Sometimes it's also wise to keep them separate and just say we don't, like really make the conscious decision to not get you in all our corporate world. And that's something where I think there's a lot more sensitivity on this. How do these both parties, how do we keep them happy? And I also have to say, even on the corporate side, I think at this point, at least coming now from also pharmaceutical or life sciences, they understand it's no longer us, the big company, you have research and then you have your stages and then your marketing team and you go on. That's just not flying anymore. That's just not. So open innovation, and I know it's a big buzzword, but I mean, I say it very consciously, and I really mean that. It needs to be the corporates, the startups, the service providers and so on coming together and understanding that there has been a lot, at least for us externally, trying to change the culture on our end. And that means sometimes little things where we change the way we, for example, no longer this whole email sending around. I mean, this is just so bad, so many emails. So saying, how do you do it when you're in your private life? I mean, you go through social media and have your platforms. So internally, we changed it also towards that way, which is a culture. If you talk a startup, it's like a Google Docs, Slack. I mean, that's how they work. So that you're not, oops, sorry, we don't have these systems, you can't do that. So that being said, that's just one part, this platform. The other one is then changing your IT department, that people actually know what DevOps is or something, so changing these pieces. So in a nutshell, what I want to say is I think it's sensitivity on both ends. The corporates definitely open up. They still have a way to go, but it starts changing. And I've seen that specifically in the last, I want to say, 4 to 5 years, given what you said earlier, the market pressure, and we simply, I mean, we're the big corporations. We need to move fast. There's no other way than coming together, and they open up significantly when it comes to changes.
I just wanted to add one thing. We had an interesting path into Cisco that is different than other people had. I think one of the things that our founders thought were really important was for us to continue to sit in an ecosystem where we operate in a bit of a closed loop. So we have a sales team and marketing and operations, like the whole sort of thing sits still together. From a Meraki perspective, we report one way for one part of the business and report another way at the very top for the other. For the sales team, reports into the sales team. Everybody else reports into our engineering team. But we have a full ecosystem inside of Meraki still. And when you think about what that does for a team to show up within a team, it really made that landing within a larger organization feel easier. I mean, I've only done this twice, and the second time felt a lot easier because we were landing together. There was some acknowledgement that the way that we worked together was good for the business, and we were able to continue to do those things. So I think, again, the flexibility of the acquisition moment, especially for organizations that do a lot of them, is really important. And for those of you that are acquiring companies, like being able to step back and say, hey, every single one of these things is different. Every single one of these leadership teams is different, and I can't have a prescriptive approach to bringing them into my company. And I think that's one of the critiques that we had and our founders had going into the process with Cisco was they wanted it to be different because they felt like that difference was going to be important to the long-term success of the organization. And to Cisco's credit, they were willing to do it. And the more that happens, I think then you can actually set a business up to be successful as long as, it continues to meet the goals that you have for the return on the investment and also for like what you feel like the market share can be for that particular part of your company. but like you got to show up and not think that this is a cookie cutter kind of thing, and like throw the same people and the same processes and bring out your forms and all of that stuff. Like, I think that's the kiss of death on companies that do a lot of acquiring, is that they feel like it's just, oh, here are 50 steps. Let's go do it against this one and let's go do it against the other one. People don't get set up for success that way.
So that dovetails into a question from the audience, which is, I think it's geared toward the startup side of it, but if you were to say which skills are most important for a startup to, in the way that they innovate, in a way that leads to or creates a successful collaboration with a corporate partner, what are you looking for? What do you want? How do you want to see that startup innovates and does its business, operates? That tells you, yeah, this is a company we can work with.
Well, from the Cisco side, everything that we do is virtual collaboration. Our messaging, our calling, our meetings, everything is virtual. In fact, I work out of my house 5 days a week. My business card says teleworker, and so does probably 75% of people at Cisco, minus the people out in San Jose. But that characteristic, being able to collaborate virtually, it's an essential component of work. Not just for dealing with acquisitions, but just in general now. So I think if you're a company that's looking to get acquired and we're looking to see, is this going to be a good fit? If you're used to that type of collaboration, that's definitely a step in the right direction.
One of the things I used to be the head of innovation at Bloomberg, and the difference between the startups that worked well and the startups that didn't very often had to do with whether they found a godfather. By that I mean the executive in the company who's extremely senior, who is determined to use their power and use their influence to leave a legacy of innovation. How do you find that person? What are some of the things that startups can do to get that person to step forward?
I would say we do it systematically. So we pair startups with the executives because we found exactly the same thing. One is someone needs to, I must almost say, show you around and explain a little bit the world to you. But you can do this on an operational level. And I think that's the sponsorship is the important piece to say, as you go through annual process, then the analysts, then the shareholders, like all the stuff, to explain to you what that means and how it connects with what you're doing. It's almost like translating the language. And then on the other hand, also sometimes just shielding you from all the stuff. It's both ways. One is it's kind of showing you what's happening there. The other one is just sometimes saying, no, they're allowed to do this. And yes, they failed 3 times doing X, Y, Z, but that's normal. Kind of saying it's sometimes putting it a little bit more in context and perspective and saying, that's what we want. We want them to do X. And it's almost like a spokesperson. The higher, as you said, the better. Because then people see, and this person can also then link it to, these are our business objectives, the numbers we want to make. And yes, that's what you see here happening, will ultimately contribute to that. You need that translator, because otherwise you come in there and explain your either great technology or your model, but it's just not resonating because it doesn't use the right language. So that's what I would say. We do it systematically and also train the startups and the CEO, as you said, and to do it themselves. But it takes some time. And again, you want to have the balance of not exploring them too much in that world. So
Ben?
I mean, it's a very good point. I don't think that applies exclusively to in this M&A kind of. I mean, that's in a way the secret to all work is you must have a patron in a big business. I have a very good patron who's like the number 3 guy in the company. So I sometimes kind of joke that I work in Malcolm's sculpture garden. You know, he's like my Renaissance godfather. You know, I'm sort of doing my thing in his sculpture garden. As long as he's happy with what I'm doing, then we're all good. And I would say that that's true in the whole due diligence on both sides in a deal. If you're a smaller, if you're the acquired company or going to be the acquired, if you're the target, and you can't identify somebody on the other side of the table with whom you've sort of developed that relationship already, or you believe you can develop that relationship with. To me, that would be a red flag, because there's probably, like we said earlier on, bankers in the back pushing the steel. There's no real Vulcan mind meld. That to me would be a red flag.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to add one more thing, and I don't know how unique this is. Cisco being a big acquirer, maybe it's just because we're in a bit of a different state than most people, but we've got this thing called the Founders Forum. So every company we acquire, their founders become part of this group. And the whole point is, even though we're bringing in these companies, we don't just want to have them assimilate and then, you lose all that spirit and all that energy. So to have, this group of, I think we have about 40 or so people in it, and all 40 of these are people who have started from the ground up to a point where they were acquired, and just a massive amount of talent, knowledge, and just perspective. And I think by having them still kind of lean on each other and, compare notes, and also just, take on certain initiatives for Cisco, it's just absolutely unbelievable to have something like that.
Denise, one of the questions from the audience is sort of related to what Chris just alluded to, but how do you build community? What are some of the steps in a concrete framework that help you build community with like-minded pirates when you're on the inside of a big company?
I think we start with what type of team we want to be a part of. And we spent a decent amount of time in the last year really trying to articulate that. And we have a set of principles or operating principles that we use to guide our team. So that way on day one, people show up and we say, hey, we hired you because you're an amazing talent, but we hired you because we think you can work in this way. And this is the way that we're going to have to work to continue to innovate and continue to grow our business. So we're really deliberate about that. We're really deliberate about getting more and more deliberate about creating a culture that is focused on belonging. So people can show up and do their best work and feel like who they are is not getting in the way of that. So I think we do spend a lot of time architecting around the type of team we want by being really deliberate about things like operating principles, values, or however you want to call them. The other thing that I think we are spending a lot of time thinking about is how we run our business and making it as transparent as we can in comparison to kind of how we were when we were smaller. We spend a lot of time talking to the team about where we're going. We spend a lot of time talking to leadership, bringing the leadership team together to talk about where we're going. And in the past, we would have probably looked at that and said, oh, total waste of time. Look at all those town halls. Why are they having them? Useless, big company, blah, blah, blah. And now we're really understanding the power of getting everybody on the same page. And we spend a lot of time thinking about that, and we spend a lot of time executing against it. What the employee feels on the back end or the team member feels like is oh, I got 30 minutes worth of information, but we are trying to stitch that information, those pieces of information together to move our business forward. If there's nothing, when people get acquired, I think the thing that they sometimes forget to do is that they're still building a business within a business. Your problems don't go away. Sometimes they get amplified.
Except your founder's a millionaire now.
Except for your founder and your, engineers are millionaires now. Your heads of HR, not so much millionaires. You still have to do that within a larger organization. Cisco doesn't show up and all of a sudden your team is more engaged and more excited than they ever were. It doesn't work that way. And sometimes I think founders kind of start to go, oh, I can take my foot off of that pedal and kind of just keep on focusing on, growing customer count or whatever. And the reality of the situation is that the pedal that you need to keep your foot on is the one around team, the one around talent, because it's different when you're recruiting and you're building a team within a larger organization.
All right. I think we set out to give the story of a survivor rather than a superhero, and I think we've succeeded in that. I think we took everyone into the trenches of what makes this work and had an honest, candid, no bullshit conversation about how corporations and startups can work together and some of the problems they have to be prepared to wrap their arms around. So thank you guys for the panel, and thank you to the audience. I think this is a great conversation.